Hello and welcome back to episode 21 of the Sussex Agile User Group podcast. I'm again joined by Ryan. Hey Ryan, how are you?
I'm good, Jake. How you doing?
Yeah, all right. It's my Friday today, so we're recording this on Thursday the 11th, but today is my Friday, so looking forward to a long weekend of DIY and going for long walks, and hopefully the weather holds out. What about you? What are you up to?
Ah, well, that would explain why you said get a beer in hand for this session. So
Absolutely.
yeah, good work.
So yeah, I think today we really wanted to go into catching up on Ignite, right? It happened last week. We both were catching up on various sessions as and when we could, make them around customer meetings and in the evenings and all those bits and pieces. I know me and you've been talking about the Mark Rusunovich talk quite a lot over the
As
last couple of
always,
days. It's
our
all
favourite
it
session.
just gets better every time. I never forget going to Orlando at Ignite and like it was the only session that there was queues like round physical parts of buildings to get into.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I went to go to one of his sessions in Vegas, and there was a quantum computing session that he was doing right before his inside the data center talk. And I thought, right, I'm going to sit through the quantum computing one. Most of it will probably go over my head, so at least I've got a seat for the inside data center tour one. But they chucked us all out, and there
Oh,
was a massive
really?
queue all the way around the hall. We ended up watching it remotely in another room. I was gutted.
Amazing. Well, there's the pleasure of a remote conference, right? There's no fighting for seats or trying to get in. You can watch it wherever you like. And I think I watched it on the sofa with a beer the other evening, quite late into the evening. And yeah, it's just as I needed to.
Such a cool session though, and although he does them every year, um, I- it's always kind of fresh. He always does a different dynamic, and I think he did 11 demos in this one, which was like an Ignite record or something like that. He was mentioning.
There's always something that you need to watch it for, like always like a hidden nugget. And there's always a hint to like a sysinternal tool that he wrote, God knows how many years ago. Like, yeah, like I think the task manager thing playing was
I was going to
insane. I'm
mention
sure we'll
that.
touch on it.
I was blown away by that. Just I saw in the kind of pre call thing when they were interviewing him, he showed the Dapper logo on Task Manager using his funky script. He made it available, and I think you can just like give it a bitmap, and then it will load up the CPUs. If you haven't seen it, by the way, when you're listening, check out Mark Razinovich's talk from Ignite. Otherwise, you'll have no idea what we're talking about. But
Yeah.
effectively, he's written a script which uses one of the largest host sizes in Azure, which is it's like 420 cores, and it shows it on Taskmaster, and the script will basically load up particular CPUs and draw pictures in Taskmaster and even play Tetris, which is
I was gonna say
very,
when he
very
played
cool.
Tetris on it was insane. I was like, okay, this is like the ultimate. Didn't he play like I forget what it's called, but like where you hit like have a thing at the bottom and the ball bounces and you hit bricks up in the ceiling.
Yeah, I can't remember what that's called. But
No idea what it's called. Before my time, but he played that on it as well, and it was just insane. Yeah, so I think his comment was, "What a way to abuse like a couple of $1 million of hardware."
yeah. Well, we might as well actually just cover that actually, and I've got some notes on it. That host, that kind of new breed of Azure host that runs VMs and services and everything in Azure, they've got funky names for it. This one's called the Mega Godzilla Beast, which sounds like something out of Power Rangers to me. But yeah, crazy name. But yeah, 420 CPU cores and 24 terabytes of RAM even, which is just mind blowing. And actually, when we were catching up in the week, we kind of said some of the customer environments that we used to run in partner days, we probably get all of our customers on that one host.
Yeah, exactly. By one
Not
big
very
dedicated
resilient, but
host.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's
Uh,
just insane.
yeah, I think we even mentioned like some of our customers wouldn't even have SANs bigger than 24 terabytes, and we've got it in RAM on this. So yeah, just phenomenal how it's progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of the highlights that stood out to us from Ignite. And I guess because Jack and I are from an infrastructure background, Jack's got a particularly love of networking and things like that. We are going to be slightly biased to some of the stuff that we are that's super interesting to us, and that's not to discredit any of the other areas. There's a lot of announcements in the data and AI space, but it's just we won't be able to do them justice in talking through them. So we're going to bring some of our colleagues in for a follow-on session around data and AI and some of the announcements. But saying that, one of the big announcements was Microsoft Mesh, which is kind of this augmented mixed reality thing that's kind of was demoed, which is kind of like really kind of eye-opening in terms of this is what the future looks like. And if you watch the opening ceremony, they kind of had these avatars of people within, interfacing with each other and having these, crazy augmented graphics. And is that the future of Teams meetings, Jack? So are you going to,
Do you know what? It
we're
could be a
going
nice change from the daily monotony of Teams meetings and doing the same thing every day and staring at my same screen. I'd be up for it.
I was talking to a colleague that works in, or a friend that works in the gaming industry, and they've been trying this as well. And they had this kind of artificial reality space where you could kind of just kind of walk up to people and have a casual chat as you would in the office, and you had that kind of space and boundary, but you could kind of barely hear people in the distance. So it's
That's
kind of
really
like
cool.
being there in person in this pandemic. And I wonder if Mesh could achieve the same, right? If we could, those water cooler chats that we talk about that we're missing with customers. Yeah, could Mesh give that? Be very
Do you
cool.
know, it'd be great to see because the world has definitely changed. So there is a space in the market for something like this. So I think it'd be great to see. I love the tagline of Mesh. Proper salesy sort of here can be anywhere, which is a great tagline. Like it sums it up perfectly. And I think it's
Mm.
not only that social element of Mesh that I liked. It was people like designing new cars or new parts for machinery or whatever it is, or doctors and all these sort of things that we've seen, things like HoloLens and all of our other sort of services been used for. But being able to all get into a virtual room or your own room, but see everything that everybody else is seeing and presenting, and, being able to zoom into those things and almost like walk around like you were in a real room is just insane. Like I think until I try it, I won't really know what my feeling is on it.
I know what you mean. But actually, with the pandemic and everyone being based remotely and everything, it's well timed, I think, in terms of being able to innovate without having to be there in person, especially with things like you say, hands-on things. Imagine a doctor learning surgery on a human being, and not being able to do that with social distancing and everything else. Using
And
tools
that was
like that could be a real game changer.
and that was one of the great things in the opening keynote where they sort of went through that surgeon who was based, I think, in New York, and
Mm.
he was like helping out a country in Africa, like going through a surgery that he would normally be out there and flying out, but obviously due to restrictions he can't. So this technology has enabled him to help those people and carry on with procedures that need to happen, but he can't physically be there, and that's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, yeah, very, very cool. So as I said, we've got loads of announcements to go through, and if we go through them in the detail that we have Microsoft Mesh, we're going to be here all night. So let's start
Brace
cracking through
yourself.
some of them. Exactly. One of the ones that stood out to me was newer regions being announced. Let's kind of keep it high level at the moment, and we'll go into some of the kind of deeper topics. But yeah, we've got a new kind of North China region coming out in 2022. I think the current count of Azure regions is up to 65, which is
Mind blowing.
crazy because I remember when I started working in Azure, it was like 30 something. And I need to check actually, but I think Azure is still double what the main competitors are in terms of amount of regions and scale, and particularly the network as well. There was, from a global network point of view, and a lot of people don't seem to know this, but the Microsoft network I think is still the second largest global network in the world.
It's massive.
Um, and some of the stats that came out of some of the Ignite sessions that I was in was 130,000 miles of fiber and subsea cable, and 300 terabits a second of bandwidth added to the WAN in 2020 alone, which is, how do you do that even in a pandemic? How does that even scale? How are we managing to do that? But yeah, incredibly cool. And then going down to that kind of last mile, we've got 180 edge sites now,
I
which
know
which is
that's
really
grown
great.
massively.
So yeah, it's great to see the Azure beast growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, I think another great thing to call out on that Azure Regions piece as well was again Mark Rasanovich's talk. I think he called out the every new region we're going to build is going to have availability zone support, which was really nice to
Yes.
see.
Yeah.
And I think he also called out that every country that has an Azure region will have an Azure region that has availability zones by the end of 2021. So
Hmm.
that's also amazing to see. So every country that we're in, there will be a region that you can use that has availability zones and the services that are availability zone aware to use, which is great for improving SLAs.
I'd be interested to know how that works actually, and maybe we've been trying. we've been talking about getting one of our data center colleagues in that manage one of these regions. I think that'd be a really interesting chat. But when
Definitely.
we've been on some of these talks that we've done with the data center team in terms of how the regions are built, some of these was like Singapore and London, and the ones that are based in cities where they are hugely confined by space. I'd be really interested to know how they're retrospectively adding availability zones to those that don't have that geographical sprawl. Are that is they making the same thing again in the next block, or how's that stuff working?
Yeah, definitely something to for a future episode. We'll definitely have to try and get one of our data center colleagues along. But yeah, I think moving on from there, I think we talked about this last week, but it was still again Azure Firewall Premium was pushed again. In terms
Mhm.
of it's out, go and try it, and I can't suggest it enough. Go and watch our, I think it was episode 19 or episode 18. Go back and watch our Azure Firewall
19.
Premium episode. Like it's super cool. And we're speaking to so many customers about that right now. So yeah, definitely go and check that out. Um, but yeah, what was that, your other sort of key takeaways? What were some of your big things that you saw?
One of the things that stuck out, and it's not the most exciting ones, but it's because I'm working in it every day, is Azure Monitor integration with Windows Virtual Desktop, going GA soon, which is awesome because we've done talks when we were doing face-to-face meetups and stuff. I did a demo on Monitor when Sentinel was first announced. For any of you die-hard Sussex Azure Group fans that were there, appreciate it. I think it was our second chat or our first chat. But yes, it's really cool to see how that's kind of matured and to see native integration with WVD, especially as the WVD service has just exploded in the last year, and the amount of development work that's gone into it to have new features. It feels like month on month there's new features being added to WVD, but
Yeah,
that
it's
was
like the
really
new
cool to
ANF.
see. It
Like
is,
ANF was
yeah.
really popular, and now this is really popular, and I think they're both just carrying on at the same sort of pace. As they haven't really stopped or slowed down, and they feed hand in hand to each other as well, right? ANF is very
Yeah.
common with WVD deployments, and they're both carrying on at that pace. So yeah, great to see that announcement for the monitor stuff, because it was a bit of a gap that was missing. But now it's going to go GA, integration with log analytics, just a standard workbook, all integrated via the portal. Going to be absolutely vital for WVD admins out there.
Absolutely. Another one that kind of stood out was on-demand capacity reservations for Azure virtual machines. So the theory is, if pandemic hit, things like that, obviously an Azure region has a massive amount of resource, but it is, does have a limit at some point. And if the whole world tries to spin up a particular tier of virtual machine, there's going to be a point when it runs out, potentially, hopefully not. But there is the capability to add capacity reservations, which is different to reserved instances. Make that clear. But to be able to kind of make sure that you always have the ability to spin up a certain VM type is a good addition, I think. Particularly with going back to WBD, and Jack, you and I have done work with media organizations doing remote editing and things like that, where they need GPU accelerated VMs. There's not many, compared to all the rest of the flavors of VMs, there's not many NVIDIA backed on. So for them to say, right, I need those at this point as we scale up to do a production or something like that, that's a cool feature.
Yeah, I think, and you made a really good point around they're different to reservations. They're called reservations, but they aren't reservations in terms of a cost benefit or saving. They are capacity based. Important to call out, it's like private preview at the moment, so there's a form to fill out if you want to sign up to gain access. So if you check out the Azure blog, you'll find that, and you can fill that out, and somebody will get in touch. But yeah, they can be used in conjunction with cost-based reservations, if we call it that, to differentiate. So yeah, really, really nice to see, and definitely going to help some of our customers out there who absolutely need to guarantee those workloads.
Yeah. I'm going to bring up one that I know that you're going to love, Jack. And we've
Um,
spoken about
which
this as your root server in preview was announced.
Okay, so like I think I raised a user voice for a BGP endpoint in an Azure VNet 3-4 years ago. Like it was just like always the thing that I thought it'd be really good putting all these NVAs in Azure if I could just not have to do UDRs, and I could connect via BGP to something in the VNet, and then it would automatically learn my routes, and it would plumb them into the VNet, and happy days, and it would make HA a lot easier and all these things. And it was something that I thought would maybe never happen. And then when I joined Microsoft, I got wind of this thing that was in existence, and VWAN happened, and we
Mm-hmm.
saw the root server and stuff like that. I was like, okay, there's momentum here. There's something that might happen. And then, yeah, obviously this announcement has been made and it's out in preview. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet. However, as I said, I'm off tomorrow, so that may change. Um, but yeah, effectively, this is a BGP endpoint, so it's two VMs that literally you can create a BGP relationship to from your NVAs and Azure, so Palo Altos, Meraki, anything that supports BGP. It could even be a Linux VM with something like Bird on it or something like that if you really wanted to go down like the open source route. And then any routes that you advertise to those BGP endpoints will be learned and then injected into the routing table of your Azure VNet automatically. So you don't need to do user-defined route tables anymore. When you've got these sort of scenarios, which is absolutely amazing. And also from a HA perspective, where you generally would have load balancer sandwiches, so you'd have a load balancer, firewalls or MVAs in the middle, and another load balancer. Well, actually, we're only doing that for the HA scenarios most of the time. You may be doing it for performance and other reasons, and you can still sort of solve those scenarios with root server, but it keeps failover super easy because there's no root tables to go and update or no load balancers to point to anymore with a root table. They're just all learnt by the root servers and then injected into the VNet. So if you've got two Palo Altos, let's say, and they're both advertising the default route of 0/0 to the Azure VNet, and one of them goes down, the BGP route just disappears and traffic carries on going through the other one. You haven't got to do anything. There's no APIs to update. There's no waiting for like the agents to update and learn the new routes. It's instant because it's just part of the VNet. We'll leave some links in the show notes to obviously go and do more reading around this. But there is some great blog posts from a customer engineer based out in, I think, Germany. The Cloud Trooper blog, if any of you know about it, but go and read it. Jose has done loads and loads of like deep dives into like pretty much any scenario you ever want to go and try with root server. He's done it and blogged about it. So it's well worth a read. If you haven't got the time to go and spin it up, you can spend probably an hour reading these blog posts, and you'll learn an awful lot. So yeah, as you can tell, properly excited about root server. Cannot wait to go and try it. It's going to make some of my customers' lives a lot easier.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to make the management of routing so much easier. There's complex hub spokes, multiple spokes with UDRs all over the place. It's going to make that so much easier.
Absolutely, yeah, and you'll notice a new option on your VNet peering is a probably a good call out. So you'll see where you have like allow gateway transit, use remote gateways, and all those things. There's now one that's related to root server. I can't remember the exact term, but basically it says like learn the root server routes on this VNet peer as well. So it works in hub and spoke topologies as well, which is it was great to see. I suppose staying on that networking theme, we can rattle through a few others very quickly. So ExpressRoute IPv6 for private peering was announced in
Mm-hmm.
preview, which is really nice to see. So I know a few customers waiting for that. So not really a lot more to say on that one, but IPv6 public preview for private peering. I think if we dip into a couple of other things on ExpressRoute, they finally released some metrics so that you can see like how busy your ExpressRoute gateways are in terms of CPU, the packets per second, how many routes are being received and advertised, those sort of things as metrics. So that's really nice to see because they were sort of missing before. So available via.
That's really good, actually, especially in terms of sizing. Sometimes it feels, when I've guided customers through this a bit, it can be a bit of a finger in the air in terms of VPN gateway and ExpressRoute gateway sizing. They've got those metrics to see how much it's being taxed, and they might be seeing bottlenecks and not related it to the gateway. Check out those metrics. You can go up a tier if you need to. That's going to be super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another great thing as well was there was a 200 route limit that you could learn from on-prem before for an express route. That's now 1,000, so that's 5 times. So that's great to see as well. And then I think realistically, if I was to pick another one of my favorites in the networking space, because I could talk on this for hours, is Virtual WAN supports a default route now to spoke VNets. So before, if you wanted to deploy your own MVA that couldn't go in a hub, like Barracuda or Cisco or VMware that got announced actually at Ignite as well. So say you wanted to put a FortiGate or a Palo Alto in a spoke VNet on vWAN, you couldn't actually throw internet traffic to it before. You'd have to directly peer to that VNet and do a UDR and all these random bits and pieces. Now you can actually just put on your route table in vWAN, you can say, the default route goes to this spoke on this VNet connection, and this is the IP address to hit. And you can also put multiple next hop IP addresses as well. So that's been something that people have been waiting for a long time. So it's going to make that architecture a lot easier, and it's already updated in the docs in the routing scenario. So go and have a look at that. Also, a mind blowing stat. and this probably shows you the pace of the pandemic. You can before a virtual WAN hub could support 10,000 concurrent point to site connections to a single hub. So, remote users, laptops, 10,000 connected to a single hub. We now support 100,000 per hub, which is like, yeah,
Yeah.
you obviously need to increase your scale units and make sure you've got big enough VPN gateways behind the scene to deal with that. But, sort of scale we're talking with virtual WAN now is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Saw some announcements around Azure Bastion. Again, that's something that we demoed earlier, when we were face to face as well, when that was first in preview. Super cool because I still see people standing up jump boxes in Azure. It's like, no, use Bastion, it's so much better. Yes, and actually, with some of the announcements in Ignite, massively more scalable. Up to 500 concurrent connections for a single Bastion host is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's coming in 2021, right? So sort of like it's to come. It's not out yet just yet, but that is on its way.
Yeah,
So yeah, that'd be amazing.
and health metrics as well.
Yeah, exactly. Again, right, as that scale comes, we're going to need to know how busy our Bastion hosts are and all that sort of stuff. So, it's just another thing to look after, well, sort of look after, but be aware of, I suppose, is more the thing there. Key vault integration for your SSH keys was pretty nice as well. So I had that from a customer the other day. Like, we've got lots of SSH keys. Where do we store them? And I was like, well, key vault makes sense. But then they're like, but how do I've then got to go and download it, then upload it to use for Bastion? Like, oh, well, you can just select your key vault now. If you've got access to it, you can say, use this key, and off you go. And with Key Vault now supporting RBAC instead of just access policies, that's going to make life really easy to control that stuff as well. So yeah, that was really nice to see.
Awesome.
I think one of the other big things for me that I want to call out is around Windows Server 2022. It's something that it's going back to a bit of our old school days, right? People were like, "Oh, the clouds and Windows Server's dead. Never going to have new versions of this." And we said that probably about 2019, and then everybody's like, "Oh, 2019, last version of Windows Server." Yeah, and now we got Windows Server 2022. So, I don't think there's any signs of slowing down on the Windows Server side. I think people are always going to want it and need it.
I guess it was assumed when Windows 10 went kind of evergreen, and that's kind of the last version. That we're now getting these 6 monthly updates to Windows 10. I guess the same was assumed for Windows Server, but the features change more radically, I feel, on a server OS than the end user OS. So I think it makes sense. I haven't played with Windows Server 22 yet, so I can't really comment on some of the features that are in there, but I'll be looking to spin up, one of the previews once it's available in the Azure portal natively. But another thing on the server side was hot patching for 2019.
Yeah, so this is like sort of a previewy. You have to run a very custom version of it. Has to be in Azure at the moment, and you have to run an Azure edition of 2019. So you can't just make an existing VM do this as 2019. Because it is a bit of a preview feature. But yeah, effectively it's like soft kernel updates. So you effectively don't have to reboot the VM to do patching for pretty much most of the updates. There will potentially be some updates that you'll still have to do a reboot for, but a lot of the updates you don't actually need to do a reboot for. And there's a really nice blog post that I think Rick Claus and Ned Pyle, who from the Windows Server team, did sort of a talk on the tech community. We'll put a link in the show notes for this. But they did like a side by side of like a 2019 server without hot patch and one with hot patch, and like they had like a file copy going on at the same time, and they just showed the differences because like initially the server without hot patch like got well ahead of the file copy, but then it did its update slower, and then you had to reboot it. And when you had to reboot it, the other one had like just jumped past because it never had to reboot, so it carried on doing bits and pieces of the file copy and patch at the same time, but then never had to reboot, so saved a load of time in that process. So yeah, not going to be make your patching instant, but it's certainly going to help in scenarios.
It's going to really simplify maintenance windows though. I remember when supporting things on prem as well, working on a Sunday evening to patch and reboot Exchange servers, SQL servers, Windows servers, just because of that reboot, right? You had to interrupt the uptime to install those updates. So, and I think that's something that has come across from the open source world, right? And you didn't know, there's custom versions of the Ubuntu kernel and things like that for Azure too. But coming from an open source background, it's very rare that you had to really reboot a Red Hat box or whatever, unless you're doing a significant kernel update or something like that. So it's great to see that that's been carried over. And hopefully, go on.
I think on that same topic of, like not having to update and patching, Auto Manage got some big announcements as well, right? It was expanded yet again. So I think Linux is now in scope for Auto Manage. So
Oh, cool.
Auto Manage was announced at the last Ignite in preview for Windows, and sort of just it helps you configure all those ancillary services like backup, policy, um, automatic updates via VM patching and all those things that happen behind the scenes that you have to configure as ancillary services. There's now support for Linux as well, so certain Linux distros are supported in that as well. So yeah, if you just want to use Azure but you haven't got the operational side of it, and you don't really want to have to worry about that side of stuff, Auto Manage is definitely for you, so go and check that out.
You mentioned my favorite word, backup. So
I
Azure
did.
Backup Center is now GA. So um, it's great to see that Azure Backup's really matured in the last few years, and it's kind of grown in terms of its capability so much that there's now a separate, backup center for it, for managing not just Azure VMs on-prem, other places, and everything else, wherever you want to back up to a recovery services vault. So it's great to see that that's gone GA.
I think the nice thing around Backup Center as well is that Azure Backup's really becoming that it's not just a product; it's becoming the place for backups. And I know that sounds really like sensible, like you're like, well, yes, backup. What do you mean, everything? But you can do now. Blob backups is in preview, right? But you control that from Backup Center, so
Yeah,
everything is starting to go that way. And like all the configuration, because Blob backups is probably like change feed notification service and blob backups and soft delete and all those sort of things that blob versioning, but actually it's all just controlled and orchestrated through Backup Center, which just makes it easier for backup teams, right, who are looking at all this
it really
stuff.
does. Yeah, and I think you know, for many years people would use Azure Backup just for Azure resources, and then if they've got on-prem or somewhere else, they might use whatever they're using on-prem, but use like blob storage as a as an archive storage tier for backup exec or whatever they're using on-prem. I think as your backups mature so much that you can actually replace all of your backup all over the place with that central place, manage your retention policies, all of your governance in one place. Your backup is all stored in one place as well, so it's just kind of really neat.
And I think you that was a beautiful segue. If you set this up, then perfect. Archive support for Azure VMs and SQL IaaS VMs in Azure Backup as well now. So obviously you would generally store it in your recovery services vaults, and that's sort of hot/cool storage. You don't really have to worry about what that is, but obviously it's an increased cost versus to storing it in something like the archive tier of blob storage. So you can now in preview, I believe, and it's limited preview. I think you need to get your subscription or your recovery services vault whitelisted. But look at the blog post, and I'm sure there'll be info on how to do that. But you can effectively, when your backup retention points meet certain criteria, like they're a certain age, effectively they've matured, if we call it that, you can then move them into the archive tier and obviously get a reduced cost of keeping those backups around. So great for those legal and compliance challenges where you may not be keeping them around because you need to use them, but you're keeping them because you have a legal requirement to do so. Get a cost saving for doing that. So that's really nice to see.
Do you know, and I'm putting you on the spot here, apologies, if the archive tier is priced the same cost as archive blob?
I believe so, yes, because
Right.
you have the same rehydration fees and all that stuff is goes with it from what I've read. So yeah, I'll put a star over this. This is what I believe I've read, and my brain reads a lot of things during the day. But yes, I believe it is the same pricing as archive tier because the rehydration stuff also applies. Like if you early retention and rehydration and all that stuff still applies. But
Yeah.
the nice thing is it's all managed for you, right? There's none of that you have to do. You literally say, "Well, I want that backup back," and it goes and sorts it out.
That's cool. Very cool. Um, we mentioned storage, right? So there's been some announcements around particularly premium and standard SSDs on VMs. So keeping it in that kind of compute section that we've got. But yeah, zone redundant storage of premium standard SSDs is pretty cool.
Yeah,
So 3 copies of your disk effectively, but spread across a region in different availability zones.
and three
Which
synchronous copies, right? That's the key here. It's synchronous, so that's going to open up some availability scenarios that possibly weren't available before.
and massively improve the SLA, right? On a single VM running premium storage with. But then I suppose the VM itself can only exist in one availability zone. So whilst the storage is super redundant, the compute part isn't.
And this is where, like, yeah, I did the same thing. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And I was like, hang on, the compute can only exist in one place. So you've gone through the same
Mm.
thought process that I did when I saw this announcement. I think the really key thing to call out here is, say you've got an application or a SQL cluster that, or sorry, not a SQL cluster. You've got a SQL VM that you can't cluster for, the application doesn't support it, or you don't want to pay for it, and all those things. And you don't need that level of redundancy because obviously the way to handle SQL, for example, say is build AAGs and all that sort of stuff and do database replication and all that sort of stuff. But say you don't want to do that, but you want to have an improved SLA for your VM, say a zone does go down. Well, actually, what happens now is that disk is replicated across the three zones synchronously, so you haven't really lost much data. Or any data, if in fact, so make sure you got your caching options set correctly because there's always a
Mm.
chance. And then what you can actually do is because that disk exists in another zone, just rebuild the VM because a VM's only its disk, right? So you can just have an ARM template that points back to the disk and say start up in zone 2, thank you very much, if zone 1 had gone down,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
boom,
Yeah,
you're back
yeah. So
online. So it does enable some different scenarios. Not like it's not instant, it's not going to fail things over for you, but if you really need a critical application and say it can't be hosted outside of UK South, that's a great option.
so your RTO is massively increased, right? And in that same scenario before this existed, you I guess you'd restore it from a backup to a
Yeah.
new disk and then reprovision it from there. So yeah,
Or you do ASR, right, which has just announced
mm,
availability zone support recently, but it's given you
great
it's given you
segue.
lots of options to do the same things.
Yeah, definitely. We mentioned the Mega Godzilla Beast as your host earlier in terms of the huge amount of RAM and CPU available. That's translated into a new tier of M series Azure VM. So MV2 is now in preview, which I think you put some metrics down actually, Jack, in terms of what you can provision in a VM, which was crazy. So maximum is 416 virtual cores and 5.7 terabytes of memory.
Yeah, which is interesting because there's the M4, that's the M416 V2, but there's the M416 MS V2 as well, which has
Oh
got
yeah,
11,
11 terabytes.
11 terabytes of RAM and 416 cores. So that's what all my WVD session hosts are now going to be that.
Watch your zero credit get eaten up in seconds.
Exactly. I'm
But,
sure I'll get an email.
a few people ask me, why would you need a VM with so much memory? But a lot of people are migrating, SAP HANA to Azure. And I think even in Mark Razinovich's chats, he said, people are asking for more memory because of these, huge in-memory databases that need as much
Exactly.
resource as possible. So I imagine that's pretty much the primary use case for that, but I'm sure there are others as well.
Can you imagine? Like, if I ever get to see one of those be deployed, I'll be amazed. Because they're not amazingly common, but imagine companies like Microsoft who likely use SAP.
Mm,
We're probably going to need a fairly beefy server to run our SAP workloads. SAP
yeah,
probably need
exactly.
a big SAP inch server to run SAP.
Well, the fact that you can do nested virtualization now, it make a monster Hyper-V host.
Exactly. We could start our own virtual private server hosting company off of one VM.
All goes a bit Inception at that point, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's in phenomenal. Like the temp storage throughput is just like what's that, 250,000 IOPS on one of the
Mm,
biggest tiers. Like, yeah, mind blowing. So yeah, it's there if you want it, right? I think that's the key thing to take away. Just going back to storage slightly, there was something we touched on I think on Azure Updates episode we did a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago. If you've got a premium SSD, you can change performance tiers without a reboot now. So say you've got a
mm,
P10, but you don't need more space on the disk. You just need more performance for a period of time. You can run some PowerShell commands or API calls to change the tier of that disk without changing its size. And you can now do that on the fly. So you don't have to reboot your VM or shut it down or deallocate it. You can just do it. So that's really cool to see. That's obviously in preview, right? Call that out, but really nice to see that option as well. Black Friday scenarios, again, great option.
mm.
Need to suddenly increase your disk performance, but don't need it constantly. Don't want to increase your disk size because that could increase your backups and all those other things that go with it. Just literally just increase the performance tier of the disk and then change it back when you don't need it anymore.
Yeah, that's really useful. It feels like in the infra space, there's been a real focus on uptime. Not having to reboot VMs for small changes and things like that.
Yeah, hot
It's really
patch,
cool.
AZs, all that stuff. Like
Mhm.
it's all adding to better availability for single VMs effectively. So yeah,
One of the things I was going to chat to you about, Jack, was Azure Resource Mover. Now, we've been in these scenarios where we've had to move customers' resources between subscriptions or enrollments or in different geographies or taking advantage of different features and things like that. And it typically did incur downtime, right? So they've announced Azure Resource Move that's supposed to make this a bit easier to do. I don't know a huge amount about it, but I know that you've been doing some reading on this for a while.
Yeah, so luckily enough, I was invited to a sort of like a private behind the scenes session at Ignite in Florida in 2019, where they would like this was in its early days, right? I was seeing like mock-ups of the portal experience and what did we want to be where and all that sort of stuff. I think the best way of explaining Azure Resource Mover is a bit like Backup Center. It is it's a sort of a product, but it's actually just that central place to orchestrate things, right? So
Mm,
if you wanted to move VMs between regions, it actually just sets up ASR, right? It's not
yeah,
doing anything different. It's using the
there's
services that already exist.
no new functionality really. Like you say, it's just putting it all together in a single easy place.
Exactly, but as you said, right, it supports subscription stuff, resource group moves, and other regions, and it does a range of services. Obviously, not every service because not all services can support this sort of stuff, but it gives you paths and tells you what your dependencies are. So basically, you can set up a discovery. You can say, right, I want to go from, let's say, you've got some VMs hosted in I don't know, France, and you want to move them to UK South. So you basically say, these are my resources in France. I want to move these to UK South, and it would effectively scan all those resources and work out all the dependencies beneath them. So, say you just selected the VM, it would then go, oh, by the way, you need the VNet, and you need the disk, and you need the NIC, and you need this
Mm,
backup vault, and it would do all that stuff for you. So, if you're not fully aware on how it's all tied together, it's a really nice way of just saying, okay, I want that, and then it would do a scan and go, by the way, you need all these other things. Do you want me to add them?
mm.
You'd be like, yeah,
No,
add
that's
them in,
useful.
and then it just does all that orchestration and setting up for you. And then based on the service, obviously your migration path is different. But it's that orchestration place, I think, is the fairest thing to say for moving resources around in Azure. So it doesn't fix some of the challenges we may have, like with subscription moves. It's like you're not going to instantly say, oh, I can move from CSP to EA and all those sort of things that, there are
Yeah.
current limitations, but it's certainly going to help you orchestrate and work out what the plan is to approach those moves.
It's good that it does that kind of validation piece. I remember when I was moving resources ages ago, it would start doing the process and then fail because of a reason. Then you have to go and fix it, and then you try it again and it fails because of another reason. So it's going to save potentially a lot of time and make it a bit easier to do. But we'll put a link to Resource Mover in the show notes, along with a load of other stuff that we've spoken about in this session.
Definitely go and play with it. It's really, really good to see.
Um, and yeah, what other stuff? So just I know that we didn't say we said sorry we weren't going to touch too much of the data and AI side, but one of the things that jumped out to me in my kind of limited data knowledge was Azure Synapse Pathways. Um, it's which is basically a migration tool, but it does assessments of things like Netezza or on-prem SQL and things like that, and really does that analysis and helps you do migrations to Azure Synapse, which
This is
is
the one that rewrites the code as well, like rewrites your queries and stuff like that, right?
and for a customer that myself and a colleague have been helping do a Netezza migration over the last year, this has just come out right at the end of migration. It would have been so much use at the beginning, but it's really cool to see, and it's going to make a lot of that stuff a lot easier, take a lot of the manual effort out of it.
Synapse is becoming like a bit of similar to Azure Resource Mover and Backup Center, right? It's becoming the place to control lots of data things now. Like it was originally like seen as the data warehouse modern like version 2, like SQL data warehouse
Mm,
version 2, and now it's got Spark in there, and it's got machine learning as part of it. It's got
yeah,
a bit of AI in there, and it's got pathways, and everything sort of migrating to Synapse. It's like a black hole. Everything's going
it's
towards
like
it.
all-encompassing data and AI tool and analytics tool.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see. I was actually working with one of our data colleagues on a Synapse deployment today, and yeah, it was just like even the 5 minutes tour he gave me of it. I was like, okay, I see a lot of value in this. So yeah,
Yeah,
maybe we had Vince on to talk about it. Maybe we need another deep dive into Synapse.
I was going to say there's some great demos on Synapse and Purview as well. So yeah, one of the future talks we'll get somebody in to talk us through that and show some cool stuff on the screen. But Jack, that was everything I had in my list. Was there anything else you wanted to chat through in terms of Ignite announcements?
I could talk for days around networking announcements and things that have happened there, so I'll spare the listeners. But if you want to dive into those things, or you want to hear us dive into that sort of stuff, then let us know. Tweet us, leave some comments on on YouTube. We'll definitely dive in and do some demos on there. We'll bring some people along for the journey as well. But no, I think we've covered pretty much everything. We'll leave a bunch of links and useful YouTube sessions
And
that are all out
check
there.
out check out the book of news. So the book of news, if you haven't seen it, it's got a really good summary of all the key announcements. Somebody who we had on for a podcast a while back, Kirk Ryan from NetApp, he's done a really cool 120-second Azure Microsoft Ignite Roundup video, which is
Yeah, so
really
if
cool.
you're listening, Kirk, we left it right to the end to mention that, to make sure that everyone listened to ours first, and then they can go and listen to your 120-second version of this. So, but yeah, no, it was awesome to see. Like, it definitely helped me just get a really good capture on what was out there, and I've sent it to a few people already today. So, yeah, if you want a really nice short thing to send to people, like what happened at Ignite, definitely check out Kirk's YouTube video on that. It's really cool to see.
And please leave some comments in terms of stuff that stood out to you. You know, what was your favorite announcement from Ignite? You know, anything that you want to comment on what we've spoken about is more than welcome. So please do that. But yeah, subscribe. It's going out on YouTube and also on the major podcast platforms as well.
But yeah, well, with that, I think let's wrap it up, and yeah, we'll be back in a week or so. But yeah, great to chat, and speak soon, Ryan.
Yeah, cheers, Jack. Thanks, everyone.